When my daughter Charlotte handed me an itemized invoice for $95,000 and told me I wasn't worthy enough to sit in the front row at her wedding, I smiled and signed the check. But when she screamed at me during the ceremony itself, calling me an embarrassment in front of 300 guests, I pulled out my phone and canceled every single payment with one simple call. The look of horror on her face when the music stopped and the vendors started packing up mid-vows was absolutely priceless. Sometimes the best lessons come with the highest price tags. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning light streamed through my kitchen window in Boulder, Colorado, casting long shadows across the granite countertop where the envelope lay. It was thick, cream-colored paper with my name written in Charlotte's precise handwriting. After months of planning her wedding, I thought this might finally be my invitation. My heart actually fluttered with anticipation as I carefully opened it, hoping to see those elegant words inviting me to witness my only daughter marry the man she loved. Instead, what tumbled out was a stack of invoices. Not one, not two, but 7 different bills totaling $95,000. My reading glasses slipped down my nose as I scanned the itemized list. $15,000 for photography by some celebrity photographer from Los Angeles. $25,000 for the reception venue at the historic Broadmoor in Colorado Springs. $18,000 for catering, featuring organic farm-to-table cuisine and imported champagne. $12,000 for floral arrangements, designed by Denver's most exclusive florist. $8,000 for a 3-piece orchestra. $7,000 for wedding favors from Tiffany. And $10,000 for their honeymoon suite in the Maldives. At the bottom of the stack was a handwritten note from Charlotte on her monogrammed stationery. The words were neat, businesslike, almost clinical in their coldness. Mom, after the issues you've caused with the guest list and your inappropriate comments about Marcus, consider yourself fortunate that I'm allowing you to contribute financially. This invoice covers your portion of my wedding expenses. Please remit payment within 10 days to ensure all vendors are paid on time. Also, you'll be seated in the 3rd row during the ceremony, as the front rows are reserved for Marcus's family and our important guests. Try to dress appropriately for once. Charlotte. I set the note down with trembling fingers and walked to the large window overlooking the foothills. The mountains that had always brought me peace now seemed to mock me with their indifference. How had my relationship with Charlotte deteriorated to this point? When had I become nothing more than a checkbook to her? The memories came flooding back like a dam bursting. Charlotte at 6, curled up in my lap reading bedtime stories after her father left us for his secretary. Charlotte at 12, crying in my arms when the other kids made fun of her thrift store clothes. Charlotte at 16, proud as punch when I worked 3 jobs to pay for her SAT prep classes. Charlotte at 22, graduating summa cum laude from the University of Colorado with a degree I'd sacrificed everything to help her earn. But somewhere along the way, success had changed her. The high-paying job at the tech startup, the expensive condo in downtown Denver, the BMW, the designer clothes, and Marcus, her fiancé, who worked in private equity and treated everyone who made less than 7 figures like they were invisible. I remembered the last family dinner we'd had 3 months ago at that pretentious restaurant Marcus had chosen. He'd made snide comments about my modest ranch house, my 15-year-old Honda, my job as a public school guidance counselor. Charlotte had laughed along, her voice taking on that affected tone she'd developed since moving to the city. "Really, Mom," she'd said, cutting into her $50 steak, "you should consider updating your wardrobe. Marcus's parents are very sophisticated people. We can't have you looking like you shop at discount stores." The irony was bitter. For 18 years, discount stores were all we could afford. I'd worked multiple jobs, saved every penny, denied myself countless luxuries so she could have opportunities I never had. Now, she was ashamed of the very sacrifices that had made her success possible. I picked up the note again, rereading the part about being seated in the 3rd row. At my own daughter's wedding, behind Marcus's country club friends and business associates, behind people who barely knew Charlotte. The final insult was telling me to dress appropriately, as if I would show up in rags to embarrass her. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from my sister Grace, who lived in Phoenix. "Hey sis, got your voicemail about Charlotte's wedding. So excited to finally meet Marcus. Can't wait to see our girl walk down the aisle. Love you." Grace didn't know. She had no idea that I'd been relegated to a financial contributor rather than an honored guest. She didn't know that Charlotte was ashamed of our entire family, our middle-class background, our lack of social status in Marcus's world. I walked to my bedroom and opened the closet, looking at the navy blue dress I'd bought specifically for the wedding. It wasn't designer, but it was elegant and appropriate. I'd saved for 2 months to buy it, along with matching shoes and a small clutch. Now I wondered if Charlotte would find it embarrassing too. The hurt was overwhelming, but underneath it, something else was growing. A cold, hard kernel of anger that I hadn't felt in years. Not since Charlotte's father had walked out, leaving me to raise a 10-year-old daughter alone while he started his new life with a woman half his age. Back then, I'd channeled that anger into determination. I'd worked myself to exhaustion to prove we didn't need him. I'd sacrificed my own dreams, my own happiness, my own comfort to make sure Charlotte never felt the absence of her father's financial support. I'd been mother and father both, cheerleader and disciplinarian, provider and protector. And this was my reward, a bill, a demand for payment with conditions attached. Gratitude measured in dollars and social positioning. I sat down at my kitchen table and opened my laptop. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe this was just pre-wedding stress making Charlotte out of character. Maybe I should just pay the money and show up with a smile, grateful to be included at all. But as I logged into my online banking and saw my savings account balance, reality hit me like a physical blow. $95,000 represented nearly everything I had. My retirement fund, my emergency savings, the small nest egg I'd been building in case of illness or job loss. If I paid this, I'd be left with almost nothing. And for what? To fund a wedding where I was treated like a second-class citizen? To enable my daughter's delusions of grandeur? To validate Marcus's belief that people like us were only valuable for what we could provide financially? I closed the laptop and made myself a cup of tea, my hands steadier now as the shock began to wear off. The anger was still there, but it was focused now, sharp as a blade. I wasn't going to be anyone's ATM, not even my daughter's. The next morning, I drove to Charlotte's condo in downtown Denver. The building was all glass and steel, with a doorman and valet parking. I'd only been there twice before, both times feeling completely out of place in the marble lobby with its modern art and uncomfortable furniture. Charlotte answered the door in workout clothes that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Her expression immediately turned wary when she saw me. "Mom, what are you doing here? I thought you were working today." "I took a personal day. We need to talk about your wedding invoice." She stepped aside reluctantly, and I walked into the pristine living room with its white furniture and abstract paintings. Everything was cold, modern, expensive. There wasn't a single photo of us together, not one memento from her childhood. It was as if her life before Marcus had been erased. "Look, Mom, if this is about the seating arrangement, it's just logistics. The front rows have to be reserved for VIPs. You understand?" VIPs. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. I repeated the word slowly. "And I'm not a VIP at my own daughter's wedding?" Charlotte sighed dramatically and perched on the edge of her white leather sofa. "You're being emotional. This is about optics. Marcus's father is a major donor to several charities. His mother serves on 3 different boards. These are important connections for our future. More important than your mother who raised you alone for 8 years after your father abandoned us? Don't be so dramatic. Dad didn't abandon us. His marriage to Linda has been very successful. They're actually coming to the wedding, and Linda specifically requested front row seating since she's never seen me get married before. The casual cruelty of that statement took my breath away. Linda, the secretary who destroyed our family, was getting front row seats while I was banished to the third row. Charlotte was prioritizing her father's second wife over the woman who'd sacrificed everything for her. Charlotte, where is this coming from? You used to hate Linda. You cried for months after your father left us for her. I was a child then. I understand the situation better now. Adults sometimes grow apart, and Dad needed someone more sophisticated, someone who could help advance his career. Linda has been very supportive of his success. The words hit me like physical blows. More sophisticated? Someone who could help advance his career. The implication was crystal clear. I wasn't sophisticated enough. I was deadweight in their world of climbing social ladders and making important connections. So you're saying your father was right to leave us? Charlotte shifted uncomfortably. I'm saying I understand why people make the choices they make. Look, Mom, I'm not trying to hurt your feelings, but you have to admit that you've never really tried to better yourself. You're still in the same job, the same house, wearing the same types of clothes. There's nothing wrong with that, but it doesn't exactly scream success. I worked 3 jobs to put you through college. I tutored kids on weekends and cleaned offices at night so you could have everything you needed. I bought generic groceries for years so you could take piano lessons and dance classes and go on school trips. I gave up dating, gave up traveling, gave up my own dreams so you could chase yours. And you call that not trying to better myself? Those were your choices, Mom. I never asked you to sacrifice your happiness. If you'd focused more on your own advancement instead of hovering over me all the time, maybe you'd be in a different place now. The ingratitude was breathtaking. She was rewriting history, turning my love and sacrifice into personal failings, turning my devotion into a weakness. I hovered over you because I loved you, because I wanted to give you every advantage I could. And I appreciate that, I really do. But now I need to think about my future with Marcus. His family moves in very different circles than we do. They have expectations about social status and appearance. I can't have complications. Complications? Is that what I am now? Charlotte's phone buzzed, and she glanced at it with obvious relief. Marcus is on his way up. Maybe we should continue this conversation later. No, Charlotte, we're going to finish it now. You sent me a bill for $95,000 and told me I can't sit in the front row at your own wedding. I think I deserve an explanation. Fine. Charlotte's voice turned cold, businesslike. Here's the truth, Mom. Marcus's family is paying for half the wedding. His father insisted on certain standards for the venue, catering, everything. If I want their financial support and their social connections, I have to meet those standards. That includes making sure the guest list reflects the right kind of people. And I'm the wrong kind of people? You're my mother, and I love you, but you're also a public school counselor who drives a beat-up car and shops at Target. Marcus's friends and family don't need to know the details of my background. The third row seating was actually Marcus's mother's suggestion. She said it would be more comfortable for you anyway, less pressure. The elevator dinged in the hallway, and we both heard Marcus's voice calling out a greeting to someone. Charlotte immediately straightened up, smoothing her hair and checking her appearance in the mirror above the fireplace. Marcus walked in like he owned the place, which I suppose he did. Tall, perfectly groomed, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary. He nodded at me with the kind of polite dismissal he might give to service staff. "Margaret, good to see you. Charlotte mentioned you might have questions about the wedding arrangements." Even my name was wrong. I'd corrected him multiple times that I went by Maggie, not Margaret, but he continued to use the formal version as if my preferences were irrelevant. I have questions about why I'm being asked to pay nearly $100,000 for a wedding where I'm treated like a distant relative. Marcus exchanged a look with Charlotte, the kind of wordless communication that couples develop. It was clear they'd discussed this scenario. Margaret, I think there might be some confusion about the financial arrangements. Charlotte and I are covering the majority of the expenses ourselves. We only asked family members to contribute specific amounts based on what we thought would be comfortable for everyone. Your contribution is actually quite modest compared to what my parents are providing. Modest? $95,000 was modest to him? The amount that represented my entire financial security was pocket change in his world. And the seating arrangement? Again, that's just logistics. We have limited front row space, and it made sense to prioritize immediate family and major contributors. Marcus's father and stepmother will be in the front row, along with my parents and siblings. Extended family and friends fill in from there. I'm not extended family. I'm the mother of the bride. Of course you are. Marcus's tone was patronizing, like he was explaining something obvious to a slow child. And you'll have a lovely view from your seat. The third row is actually optimal for photography. You won't have anyone's head blocking your view of Charlotte. Marcus, I think my mother is feeling a little overwhelmed by all the wedding planning details, Charlotte interjected smoothly. Maybe we could give her some time to process everything. Absolutely. Marcus checked his expensive watch. I actually have a conference call in 20 minutes, so this works out perfectly. He kissed Charlotte on the cheek and headed toward what I assumed was his home office, dismissing me entirely. I was left standing in the sterile living room with my daughter, who was looking at her phone again. Charlotte, look at me. She glanced up reluctantly. When did I become someone you're ashamed of? I'm not ashamed of you, Mom. I need this to work. Marcus is my future. His family has connections that could change everything for us. I can't mess this up. By acknowledging that your mother exists? By making sure everything goes smoothly. Look, just pay the invoice, wear something nice, smile for the pictures, and everything will be fine. After the honeymoon, things will settle down and we can go back to normal. Normal? As if anything about this situation was normal. As if I could ever look at my daughter the same way after this conversation. I picked up my purse and walked toward the door. I need to think about this. Mom, the vendors need their deposits. We're running out of time. Then maybe you should have thought about that before sending me a bill instead of an invitation. I left her standing in her pristine living room, surrounded by all her expensive things, and took the elevator down to the lobby. The doorman held the door for me with professional courtesy, probably assuming I was someone's cleaning lady or personal assistant. As I drove home through the familiar streets of Boulder, my mind was churning. Charlotte had made her choice clear. I was a financial resource to be managed, not a mother to be honored. I was an embarrassment to be hidden, not a parent to be celebrated. But I had choices too. And for the first time in 28 years of putting Charlotte first, I was going to make a choice that put my own dignity and self-respect ahead of her wants. The war between my heart and my pride was just beginning, and I was no longer sure which side would win. The decision crystallized over the next 3 days like ice forming on a winter pond. I sat in my home office, surrounded by financial documents and wedding invoices, calculating exactly what paying for Charlotte's extravaganza would cost me. Not just the money, though that was devastating enough. It would cost me my retirement security, my emergency fund, my peace of mind. But more than that, it would cost me my self-respect. I'd built a good life here in Boulder. My job as a high school guidance counselor wasn't glamorous, but it was meaningful. I helped teenagers navigate college applications, family problems, career decisions. Kids who reminded me of Charlotte at that age, uncertain about their futures, but full of potential. The irony wasn't lost on me that I spent my days helping other people's children while my own had written me off as an embarrassment. Tuesday morning, I called in sick to work and drove to my bank. Janet Morrison, my financial advisor for the past 15 years, looked genuinely concerned when I explained what I was considering. Maggie, honey, this would wipe out everything you've worked for. Your 401k, your savings, even the small investment portfolio we've been building. Are you absolutely sure about this? Janet had been more than just my advisor over the years. She'd helped me navigate the financial chaos after my divorce, taught me how to budget and save, celebrated with me when I finally paid off my mortgage. She knew how hard I'd worked for every dollar. If I pay this, what would I have left? She pulled up my accounts on her computer screen, her expression growing more troubled as she scrolled through the numbers. About $8,000 in checking and whatever's in your household emergency fund. Maggie, that's not enough to live on if something happens to your job or your health. And if I don't pay it, then you keep your financial security intact. But I gather this isn't really about money, is it? I shook my head, fighting back tears I'd been holding in for days. She doesn't want me at her wedding, Janet. Not really. She wants my money, but she's ashamed of who I am. Janet leaned back in her chair, her professional demeanor softening. She was roughly my age, also a single mother, though her kids were younger. Have you considered that maybe she's testing you? Sometimes our children push us to see how far we'll bend before we break. And what if I don't bend? What if I break the other way? Then maybe she learns that actions have consequences. Maybe she remembers what you taught her about respect and gratitude before the world convinced her to forget. I left the bank without making any transfers, but Janet's words stayed with me. Actions have consequences. I'd spent 28 years shielding Charlotte from the consequences of her choices, always swooping in to smooth the path ahead of her. Maybe it was time she learned that other people's generosity wasn't unlimited. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in months. I called my sister Grace in Phoenix. We'd grown apart since Charlotte had become successful, partly because Charlotte always found excuses to avoid family gatherings where her modest background might be exposed. Maggie, perfect timing. I just booked my flight to Denver for the wedding. I'm so excited to finally meet this Marcus I've heard so much about. Though honestly, you've been pretty quiet about wedding details. I found myself telling Grace everything. The invoice, the seating arrangements, the conversation at Charlotte's condo. By the time I finished, Grace was furious. She did what? Oh, Maggie, no. No, no, no. That girl has lost her mind. After everything you did for her, she says she needs to think about her future with Marcus's family. Her future? What about her past? What about the woman who sacrificed everything so she could have a future in the first place? Grace had always been more confrontational than me, quicker to anger, slower to forgive. During my divorce, she'd wanted me to take Charlotte's father to court, to demand higher alimony, to make him pay for abandoning us. I'd chosen the quieter path, accepting a modest settlement to avoid a bitter custody battle. Grace, what would you do if this were Sarah or Emma? There was a long pause. Sarah was Grace's oldest, about to start college. Emma was still in high school. Both girls adored their Aunt Maggie and looked forward to our rare visits. Honestly, I'd let her pay for her own damn wedding, and I'd make sure she knew exactly why. You don't treat your mother like an ATM and expect her to smile about it. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. The beauty of the landscape had always soothed me, but tonight it felt distant, like a painting in a museum rather than the view from my own home. My phone buzzed with a text from Charlotte. Mom, just confirming you received the invoice. The caterer needs final headcount and payment by Friday. Let me know when you'll transfer the funds. No greeting, no question about my health or happiness, just a business transaction. I set the phone aside without responding and went to bed early, but sleep wouldn't come. I kept thinking about a conversation I'd had with Charlotte when she was 16, after she'd been caught cheating on a history exam. But Mom, everyone cheats. It's just how you get ahead. Charlotte, integrity isn't about what everyone else does. It's about who you choose to be when no one's watching. The shortcuts you take today become the compromises you live with tomorrow. That's easy to say when you don't have any real ambition. Not everyone can settle for mediocrity. Even then, she'd seen my life as settling, my choices as failures of ambition rather than conscious decisions about what mattered most. I'd tried to teach her that success without honor was hollow, but clearly those lessons had been forgotten somewhere along her climb up the corporate ladder. Wednesday brought another text. Mom, seriously need to hear back about the payment. Vendors are getting nervous. Thursday, the messages escalated. Mom, what's going on? This isn't like you to be irresponsible about commitments. Irresponsible? That word stung more than she probably realized. I'd been the responsible one for her entire life. Responsible for earning the money, managing the household, making sure homework was done and appointments were kept, and college applications were submitted on time. I'd been responsible when her father decided he wasn't. I'd been responsible when being responsible meant sacrificing my own dreams. Friday morning, my phone rang at 7 a.m. Charlotte's name flashed on the screen, and I almost didn't answer. But old habits die hard. Mom, thank God, I've been trying to reach you all week. Did something happen to your phone? My phone works fine, Charlotte. Okay, well, we have a crisis. The caterer is threatening to cancel if they don't receive payment today. The venue coordinator is holding our date but says they need confirmation by noon. This is a disaster. Have you considered asking Marcus's family to cover the additional costs, since they're the ones who insisted on these expensive vendors? Mom, we can't do that. They're already contributing so much, and they'll think we're financially irresponsible if we can't manage our portion. Our portion? I thought this was my portion. There was a pause, and I could almost hear Charlotte recalculating her approach. You know what I mean, the portion we assign to family contributions. Charlotte, I want you to listen to me very carefully. I've been thinking about this invoice you sent me, and I've made a decision. Oh, thank goodness. I'll give you the wire transfer information right now. I'm not paying it. Silence. Then, quietly, what did you say? I said, I'm not paying for your wedding. Not $95,000, not $95. If you want this elaborate celebration, you and Marcus can figure out how to afford it yourselves. Mom, you can't be serious. Everything is booked, contracts are signed. Then you have a problem to solve. I suggest you start making phone calls. This is insane. You're being completely irrational. Over what? Hurt feelings about seating arrangements? The dismissive tone in her voice ignited something fierce in my chest. Hurt feelings? Charlotte, you sent me a bill instead of a wedding invitation. You told me I'm not sophisticated enough to sit in the front row at my own daughter's wedding. You're ashamed of the woman who raised you, who sacrificed everything for your success, and you think this is about hurt feelings? I never said I was ashamed of you. You didn't have to say it. Relegating me to the third row behind your father's mistress said it loud and clear. Linda isn't Dad's mistress anymore. She's his wife, and she specifically asked for front row seating. And you said yes because her opinion matters more than mine? I said yes because I'm trying to keep everyone happy. Everyone except me. Charlotte's voice grew sharp, desperate. Mom, please don't do this. If you don't pay, everything falls apart. The vendors will cancel, the date will be lost, our deposit money will be gone. You'll ruin my wedding over some petty family drama. I'm not ruining anything, Charlotte. I'm simply declining to fund a party where I'm not welcome as an honored guest. You are welcome. You're invited. You have a seat reserved. In the third row, behind people who barely know you, like a casual acquaintance rather than the woman who gave you life and raised you alone. This is emotional blackmail. The accusation hit like a slap. Emotional blackmail? You mean like sending your mother a bill for nearly $100,000 and calling it gratitude for being allowed to contribute? That's completely different. That's just practical logistics. No, Charlotte, that's what's different between us. I see relationships and love and family. You see logistics and optics and practical arrangements. You've turned into someone I don't recognize. I've turned into someone successful, someone who's made something of herself instead of settling for whatever life handed her. I didn't settle. I chose to prioritize being your mother over climbing corporate ladders or impressing people who judge others by their bank accounts. And look where that got you. Still in the same house, same job, same life you had 20 years ago. The cruelty of that statement took my breath away. She was dismissing 2 decades of devotion as wasted time, failure to launch, lack of ambition. All those nights I'd stayed up helping her with projects, all those weekends spent at her activities instead of pursuing my own interests, all those sacrifices I'd made gladly because I loved her, she saw as evidence of my inadequacy. Charlotte, I want you to understand something. When I was your age, I had dreams too. I wanted to travel, maybe go back to school for a master's degree, write a book, learn photography. I gave up those dreams to focus on raising you. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to give you the best possible start in life. I never asked you to give up your dreams. Of course you didn't. You were a child. Children don't ask for sacrifices, they just receive them. But when those children grow up, they usually recognize and appreciate what was given. They don't send invoices to the people who loved them most. This is ridiculous. I'm not having this philosophical debate when my wedding is falling apart. Are you going to pay or not? The ultimatum hung in the air between us. Pay or watch her dreams crumble. Submit to being treated as a second-class citizen or be branded the villain who destroyed her special day. No, Charlotte, I'm not going to pay. And I'm also not going to attend a wedding where I'm treated like a burden rather than a blessing. You're not coming to my wedding? I wasn't really invited to your wedding. I was invited to fund it and sit quietly in the back while everyone who actually matters celebrates with you. Mom, please, don't do this. Don't choose pride over family. I'm not choosing pride over family. I'm choosing dignity over being used. There's a difference. If you don't come, if you don't pay, I'll never forgive you. The threat was delivered with cold certainty, designed to make me crumble, to choose her happiness over my own self-respect once again. It was the same emotional manipulation she'd used as a teenager when she wanted something I couldn't afford or wouldn't allow. Then, I guess you'll have to live with that choice, just like I'll have to live with mine. I hung up before she could respond, my hands shaking as I set the phone on the kitchen counter. Almost immediately, it started ringing again. Charlotte's name flashed insistently on the screen, but I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again, and again. Finally, I turned the phone off and sat in the silence of my kitchen, waiting for the relief to come. Instead, what came was an overwhelming wave of grief. Not regret exactly, but a deep sadness for the relationship that had been lost somewhere along Charlotte's journey from the loving child she'd been to the calculating woman she'd become. The next few days passed in a strange bubble of calm. I went to work, helped my students with their college applications, graded papers, attended faculty meetings. Normal life continuing while my personal world had shifted on its axis. Several times I thought about calling Charlotte, about finding some compromise that would restore peace between us. But every time I reached for the phone, I remembered the itemized invoice, the third-row seating, the casual dismissal of my role in her life. Grace called on Sunday evening, her voice tight with concern. "Maggie, Sarah just told me she got a call from Charlotte. Apparently the wedding is off? Charlotte was crying and saying you ruined everything by refusing to pay. What happened?" I explained the conversation, the ultimatum, my decision to hold firm. Grace listened without interrupting, and when I finished, there was a long pause. "I'm proud of you," she said finally. "I know that wasn't easy. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. But Grace, what if I was wrong? What if I just destroyed my relationship with my daughter over money?" This wasn't about money, Maggie. This was about respect, about whether you were going to let her treat you like a stranger who happened to have a checkbook. But now she hates me. No, she doesn't. She's furious and embarrassed and probably scared about what comes next. But underneath all that, she knows you're right. She just needs time to admit it. Monday morning brought unexpected news. My principal, Dr. Martinez, stopped by my office with a concerned expression. Maggie, I got an odd phone call this morning. Someone claiming to be your daughter, asking about your employment status and salary information. I didn't provide any details, of course, but she seemed very agitated. Is everything all right? My stomach dropped. Charlotte was trying to verify my financial situation, probably to determine if I really couldn't afford to pay or if I was just being stubborn. The invasion of privacy felt like another betrayal, another sign of how thoroughly our relationship had deteriorated. Family issues, I said simply. Thank you for not sharing my personal information. Of course. But Maggie, if you need some time off to deal with whatever's happening, just let me know. The kindness in his voice almost made me cry. Here was a colleague showing more concern for my well-being than my own daughter had in months. Tuesday brought a surprise visitor. I came home from work to find Marcus standing on my front porch, looking uncomfortably out of place in his expensive suit against the backdrop of my modest neighborhood. Margaret, thank you for seeing me. I hope you don't mind me stopping by unannounced. I minded very much, but I was curious about what had brought him to Boulder. What can I do for you, Marcus? I think we need to clear the air about this wedding situation. Charlotte is devastated, and frankly, I'm confused about why this has escalated so dramatically. I didn't invite him inside. We stood on my front porch as the afternoon shadows lengthened, two people from completely different worlds trying to communicate across a divide that felt unbridgeable. Charlotte sent me an invoice for $95,000 and told me I couldn't sit in the front row because I'm not sophisticated enough for your crowd. I declined to pay. It's really that simple. I think there's been a misunderstanding about the seating arrangements. That was never meant to slight you personally. It was just a matter of space and logistics. Marcus, let me ask you something. If your mother was paying for half your wedding, where would she sit? He had the grace to look uncomfortable. In the front row, obviously, but the circumstances are different. How are they different? Well, my mother she's accustomed to these kinds of events. She knows the protocols, the expectations, and I don't because I'm a public school counselor who shops at Target. I never said that. You didn't have to. Your fiancé made it clear enough. I'm an embarrassment who needs to be managed and hidden. Marcus ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, looking genuinely frustrated. Margaret, I care about Charlotte. I want her to be happy. This wedding means everything to her. If it means everything to her, then she and you can figure out how to pay for it. My contribution comes with conditions I'm not willing to accept. What if we changed the seating arrangement? What if we made sure you were in the front row? The offer surprised me. It was more than Charlotte had been willing to concede. But it also felt hollow, a compromise born of desperation rather than genuine respect. Marcus, this isn't really about where I sit. It's about the fact that Charlotte thought it was acceptable to treat me like a vendor rather than her mother. It's about the fact that she's ashamed of the life that made her success possible. She's not ashamed of you. She's just trying to navigate some complex social dynamics by throwing her mother under the bus, by protecting her future. My family's connections could open doors for Charlotte that might otherwise stay closed. She's thinking strategically. She's thinking selfishly. There's a difference. Marcus was quiet for a moment, studying my face as if trying to solve a puzzle. What would it take to fix this? What would you need to feel comfortable contributing to the wedding? Nothing, Marcus. There's nothing you could offer that would make me comfortable funding my own humiliation. So that's it? You're willing to destroy Charlotte's happiness over pride? I'm willing to preserve my dignity over enabling Charlotte's ingratitude. If that destroys her happiness, then maybe her happiness was built on a foundation that needed to crumble. He left without another word, shaking his head as he walked to his BMW. I watched him drive away and felt a profound sadness, not for my decision, but for the fact that it had come to this. That my relationship with my daughter had deteriorated to the point where her fiancé felt the need to negotiate with me like I was a hostile business partner. That evening, Charlotte called. Her voice was different, smaller somehow, less assured than it had been during our previous conversations. Mom, Marcus said he talked to you. He did. He said you won't change your mind no matter what we offer. That's correct. I don't understand why you're doing this to me. Charlotte, I'm not doing anything to you. I'm doing something for me. I'm choosing not to be treated like a second-class citizen by my own daughter. But now everything is ruined. The vendors are canceling. We're losing deposits. Marcus's parents are furious because they think we mismanaged the budget. I'm sorry you're dealing with those consequences, but they're consequences of choices you made, not choices I made. My choices? I chose to include you in my wedding. You chose to send me a bill. You chose to relegate me to the third row. You chose to prioritize other people's opinions over your mother's feelings. Those were all your choices, Charlotte. There was a long pause, and when she spoke again, her voice was thick with tears. I worked so hard for this, Mom. This wedding, this life with Marcus, his family's approval. I worked so hard to get here, and I worked hard to help you get there. But you seem to have forgotten that in your effort to impress people who judge you by your bank account. What am I supposed to do now? How do I fix this? For a moment, I felt the familiar urge to swoop in and solve her problems, to offer suggestions and support, and maybe even a compromise that would make everything better. But I caught myself. This wasn't my crisis to fix. This was Charlotte's opportunity to learn that actions have consequences, that treating people badly eventually backfires, that success means nothing if you lose your soul along the way. I don't know, Charlotte, but I know you're smart and resourceful. You'll figure something out. Will you at least think about it? About helping? Please? I've thought about it extensively. My decision stands, and if I apologize, if I admit I handled this wrong, then I'll appreciate the apology. But it won't change my mind about funding your wedding. I can't believe you're willing to let our relationship be destroyed over this. I'm not destroying our relationship, Charlotte. I'm trying to save whatever's left of it by refusing to let you treat me like a stranger who owes you money. After she hung up, I sat in my living room surrounded by photo albums I'd pulled out earlier. Pictures of Charlotte as a baby, a toddler, a young girl. Halloween costumes I'd sewn by hand. Birthday parties in our backyard with homemade cakes and dollar store decorations. Christmas mornings with presents wrapped in newspaper comics because pretty paper was an unaffordable luxury. In every photo, Charlotte was smiling. In every memory, she'd seemed happy with our simple life. When had that changed? When had she started seeing our modest circumstances as something to escape rather than a foundation to build upon? My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Linda, Charlotte's stepmother. I heard about the wedding situation. I think you're being incredibly selfish. That poor girl is heartbroken. Linda, the woman who'd broken up my marriage and was now claiming moral authority over my relationship with my daughter." I stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. Some conversations weren't worth having. The week crawled by with an awful kind of normalcy. I went to work, came home, made simple dinners for one, watched television, read books. But underneath the routine was a constant awareness that somewhere across town, Charlotte was probably scrambling to salvage her wedding plans, dealing with canceled vendors and angry future in-laws, and the social embarrassment of having to explain why her elaborate celebration had fallen apart. Part of me felt guilty for not rushing to her rescue, but a larger part felt something I hadn't experienced in years: peace. The peace of standing up for myself, of refusing to be taken for granted, of choosing self-respect over keeping the peace at any cost. Friday evening, Grace called with an update that shouldn't have surprised me, but somehow did. "Maddie, I got a call from Charlotte today. She wanted to know if I could lend her $50,000 to help salvage the wedding." "What did you tell her?" "I told her I don't have $50,000 lying around, and even if I did, I wouldn't lend it to someone who treats her mother like garbage." "How did she take that?" "Not well. She accused me of being jealous of her success, said the whole family was small-minded and bitter. Then she hung up on me." I wasn't surprised. Charlotte had always been skilled at reframing situations to make herself the victim. If the family wouldn't enable her behavior, then we were the problem, not her choices. "Grace, I keep wondering if I'm doing the right thing. What if this ruins our relationship permanently?" "Honey, what relationship? When was the last time Charlotte called just to see how you were doing? When was the last time she visited without needing something? When was the last time she seemed genuinely interested in your life?" The questions hit home because I couldn't remember recent answers to any of them. Our interactions had become transactional, her calls always preceded by some request or complaint. I'd become useful rather than loved, convenient rather than cherished. Maybe this is what she needs, Grace continued. A wake-up call that relationships aren't one-way streets, that love isn't the same thing as obligation. That night, I dreamed about Charlotte as a little girl, crying after a nightmare and crawling into my bed for comfort. In the dream, I held her close and promised that everything would be all right, that I would always protect her from whatever scared her. I woke up with tears on my cheeks, missing that little girl with an ache that felt physical. The woman she'd become was a stranger, but the child she'd been was still somewhere in my heart, still deserving of love even when the adult version of her had forgotten how to give it back. The morning of November 18th dawned crisp and clear in Boulder, the kind of perfect autumn day that Charlotte had always dreamed of for her wedding. I knew this because she'd talked about it endlessly during her teenage years, planning every detail of a celebration that would be elegant and memorable and absolutely perfect. As I sat in my kitchen with my morning coffee, watching the golden light filter through the aspens in my backyard, I wondered if she was getting the weather she'd hoped for at the Broadmoor. My phone had been mercifully quiet for 3 days. No desperate calls from Charlotte, no negotiation attempts from Marcus, no guilt-laden messages from well-meaning relatives. The silence felt like breathing after holding my breath underwater for weeks. For the first time since receiving that invoice, I felt genuinely at peace with my decision. I'd taken a personal day from work, not because I was too emotional to function, but because I wanted to spend this day doing something meaningful for myself. Something that had nothing to do with wedding drama or family conflict or proving anything to anyone. I'd decided to drive up to Rocky Mountain National Park and spend the day hiking, something I'd loved doing before Charlotte's needs began consuming all my free time. As I packed my hiking boots and water bottle, my neighbor Mrs. Chen knocked on my door. She was holding a covered dish and wearing the kind of concerned expression that meant she'd heard gossip from somewhere. "Maggie, dear, I brought you some of that soup you liked. Pearl mentioned that Charlotte's wedding is today, and I thought you might want some comfort food." Pearl was Mrs. Chen's sister, who apparently had connections to someone who knew someone who'd been invited to the wedding. Small towns, even college towns like Boulder, had their networks of information that could rival any intelligence agency. "That's very thoughtful, Mrs. Chen. Thank you. Pearl said there were some complications with the arrangements. I hope everything works out for Charlotte." I could see the curiosity in her kind eyes, the desire to understand what had gone wrong without being intrusive enough to ask directly. Mrs. Chen had been my neighbor for 12 years, had watched Charlotte grow from a sulky teenager into a successful young woman. She'd always been genuinely fond of both of us. Charlotte made some choices about her wedding that I couldn't support. I hope she finds a way to make it work. Mrs. Chen nodded slowly, reading between the lines. "Sometimes our children need to learn that love isn't the same thing as agreement. You've always been such a devoted mother, Maggie. I'm sure you did what felt right." After she left, I realized how much I'd needed to hear those words from someone outside the situation. Someone who knew me as more than just Charlotte's mother, who saw me as a person with my own worth and dignity. I was lacing up my hiking boots when my phone rang. The caller ID showed my former sister-in-law, Carol, Charlotte's father's sister. We'd maintained a friendly relationship over the years, despite the divorce, mostly because Carol had never approved of her brother's affair with Linda. "Maggie, I hope I'm not calling at a bad time. I wanted to reach out before the wedding today." "It's fine, Carol. How are you?" "Honestly, I'm confused and a little angry. David called me last night asking if I thought you were having some kind of breakdown. He said Charlotte told him you were being irrational about money." David, Charlotte's father, the man who'd abandoned us for his secretary and then spent years criticizing my parenting choices from the comfort of his new life with a woman who had no children to divide his attention. What exactly did Charlotte tell him? She said you were jealous of her success and trying to sabotage her wedding out of spite. She made it sound like you'd lost your mind and were making unreasonable demands. I shouldn't have been surprised by Charlotte's version of events, but the casual cruelty of it still stung. Painting me as mentally unstable rather than acknowledging her own behavior was a new low, even for her. Carol, Charlotte sent me a bill for $95,000 and told me I wasn't good enough to sit in the front row at her wedding. When I declined to pay, she accused me of ruining her life. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Carol had always been direct and fair-minded, qualities that had made her brother uncomfortable, but that I'd appreciated. She sent you a bill? For her own wedding? Itemized, with a note telling me I should be grateful she was allowing me to contribute. Oh, Maggie, oh, honey, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. David probably doesn't know the whole story either. Charlotte is very skilled at presenting herself as the victim. She gets that from him, unfortunately. David always had a talent for reframing his mistakes as other people's failures. Carol's voice carried years of frustration with her brother's character. What are you going to do? I'm going hiking. Charlotte made her choices, and now she has to live with the consequences. Good for you. I mean that sincerely. You've given that girl everything, and it sounds like she's forgotten how to be grateful. After we hung up, I felt lighter somehow. Carol's support meant more than I'd expected. Validation from someone who knew both Charlotte and me well enough to understand the full context of our conflict. I was loading my day pack into the car when another call came in. This one from a number I didn't recognize, but with a Colorado Springs area code. The Broadmoor was in Colorado Springs. My stomach tightened as I answered. Mrs. Patterson, this is Elena Rodriguez from Broadmoor Events. I'm calling about the Torres Sullivan wedding scheduled for this afternoon. Torres. Charlotte had kept my maiden name professionally, but was using her father's name socially. Another small erasure of my role in her life. I'm not involved with that event. I understand there may be some family complications, but we have a significant outstanding balance that needs to be resolved before the ceremony can proceed. The bride gave us your contact information as the responsible party for payment. Responsible party? Even in crisis, Charlotte was trying to manipulate the situation, making me look like a deadbeat who was shirking her obligations rather than a mother who was refusing to be exploited. Miss Rodriguez, I am not responsible for that wedding's expenses. If there's an outstanding balance, you'll need to collect it from the bride and groom. Ma'am, we have documentation showing you as the guarantor for several vendor payments. Without resolution of this balance, we'll have to cancel the event. Charlotte had apparently forged my name or authorization on something, trying to use my credit or reputation to secure services she couldn't afford. The level of deception was breathtaking, even for someone who'd already shown such disregard for boundaries. Miss Rodriguez, I never signed any guarantees or authorizations related to this wedding. If you have documentation with my name on it, it was provided without my knowledge or consent. I strongly suggest you contact your legal department before proceeding. I hung up before she could respond, my hands shaking with anger. Charlotte hadn't just tried to manipulate me emotionally and financially, she'd apparently committed some form of fraud to try to force my compliance. The betrayal felt complete now, extending beyond hurt feelings into actual legal territory. My phone immediately started ringing again, but I turned it off and threw it into my purse. Whatever was happening at the Broadmoor, whatever crisis Charlotte was facing as her elaborate plans crumbled, I was done being her emergency contact and financial lifeline. The drive to Rocky Mountain National Park took about an hour, winding through familiar mountain roads that had always calmed my spirit. I'd started coming here when Charlotte was small, initially as an inexpensive way to entertain her on weekends, later as my personal refuge when the stresses of single parenthood became overwhelming. I parked at the trailhead for Bear Lake and began the gentle hike around the water, breathing in the thin mountain air and letting the rhythm of walking quiet the storm in my mind. Other hikers nodded as we passed, strangers united by our shared appreciation for the natural beauty surrounding us. About halfway around the lake, I sat on a fallen log and allowed myself to really think about what was probably happening at Charlotte's wedding venue. The outstanding balance Miss Rodriguez had mentioned would likely mean chaos, angry vendors, and embarrassed guests. Charlotte would be frantically trying to solve the crisis, probably calling relatives and friends to beg for emergency loans. Part of me felt guilty for not being there to help her through what was undoubtedly the worst day of her life. But a larger part recognized that this crisis was entirely of her own making. She'd created unrealistic expectations, made commitments she couldn't keep, and tried to manipulate others into funding her fantasy. Now she was learning what happened when those manipulations failed. I pulled out my phone briefly to check the time and saw 17 missed calls from various numbers. Charlotte, Marcus, David, even some numbers I didn't recognize, probably wedding vendors or venue coordinators. The digital avalanche of crisis management that I was no longer willing to be part of. The afternoon sun was warm on my face as I continued hiking, following a trail that led higher into the mountains. With each step, I felt the weight of 28 years of putting Charlotte's needs before my own beginning to lift. For the first time in decades, I was spending a day entirely focused on my own happiness and well-being. As I reached a scenic overlook, my phone buzzed with a text message. Against my better judgment, I looked at it. The message was from Charlotte, and it was longer than her usual communications. "Mom, everything is falling apart. The venue is threatening to shut down the ceremony. Half the vendors have left. Guests are confused and upset. Marcus's parents are furious and talking about calling off the whole thing. I know I hurt you, and I know I was wrong, but please don't let my wedding be destroyed because of my mistakes. I'm begging you, please help me." For the first time, Charlotte was acknowledging that she'd made mistakes. For the first time, she was asking for help instead of demanding compliance. For the first time, her message contained actual humility instead of entitlement. But it was also the first time she was facing real consequences for her choices, and I wondered if her contrition was genuine or just another manipulation tactic born of desperation. I sat on a rock overlooking the valley below, watching clouds cast shadows across the landscape, and composed my response carefully. "Charlotte, I love you, but I'm not going to rescue you from the consequences of your own decisions. You chose to treat me like a vendor instead of your mother. You chose to prioritize other people's opinions over our relationship. You chose to commit to expenses you couldn't afford without my money. These are all your choices, and now you need to find your own solutions." I sent the message and immediately turned the phone off again, not wanting to see her response or be drawn back into the drama I'd worked so hard to escape. The hike back to the parking lot was peaceful, my mind clearer than it had been in weeks. I'd spent so many years defining myself through Charlotte's needs and achievements that I'd forgotten what it felt like to simply be myself, to make choices based on my own values and desires rather than her expectations. As I drove home, I found myself thinking about the future for the first time in months. What did I want to do with the money I'd kept in my savings account instead of spending on Charlotte's wedding? What dreams had I deferred that I could now pursue? What kind of relationship, if any, might be possible with Charlotte once the immediate crisis passed? Back home, I made myself a simple dinner and sat on my back porch watching the sunset behind the mountains. The peace I felt was profound, the contentment of someone who had chosen integrity over convenience, self-respect over family harmony. Around 8 o'clock, Grace called from Phoenix. Her voice was cautious, concerned. "Maggie, I've been getting calls all afternoon. Apparently Charlotte's wedding was a disaster. People are saying vendors walked out, the reception was canceled, guests left early. What happened?" Charlotte learned that actions have consequences. "Are you okay? This must be hard, even if you knew it was coming." "I'm better than okay, Grace. I'm free." "Free?" "Free from being Charlotte's backup plan, free from being taken for granted, free from funding other people's dreams while ignoring my own. It's terrifying and liberating at the same time." "And Charlotte, how is she handling all this?" "I honestly don't know. She sent me some desperate texts this afternoon, but I haven't responded. This is her crisis to manage, not mine." "That's a big change for you, letting her struggle without jumping in to help." "It's long overdue. I've been enabling her selfishness for years by always swooping in to solve her problems. Maybe it's time she learned to solve them herself." After Grace and I hung up, I poured myself a glass of wine and opened a book I'd been wanting to read for months but had never found time for. The simple pleasure of reading for enjoyment, without worrying about anyone else's needs or crises, felt like a luxury I'd forgotten existed. Around 10 o'clock, my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I could see Charlotte standing on my porch, still in her wedding dress. The elaborate gown that had probably cost more than my car looked disheveled and stained, the train torn and dirty. Her makeup was smeared from crying, her carefully styled hair falling in limp strands around her face. She looked like exactly what she was, a bride whose perfect day had collapsed into ruins. I hesitated before opening the door, knowing that seeing her in distress would test every maternal instinct I possessed. But I also knew that this conversation, whenever it happened, would determine the future of our relationship. "Mom," her voice was small, broken. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside, and she walked into my living room, the wedding dress rustling with each movement. She looked around as if seeing the space for the first time, taking in the comfortable furniture, the family photos, the evidence of a life lived simply but fully. "Your dress is beautiful," I said, because it was, despite everything. "It doesn't matter now. Nothing matters now." She collapsed onto my sofa, the volume in a skirt spreading around her like spilled cream. "The wedding was a complete disaster, Mom. The venue shut down the ceremony halfway through when the payments didn't go through. Marcus's parents are humiliated. Half our guests left before dinner. The vendors took back everything they could carry." I sat in the chair across from her, maintaining some physical distance while I processed her words. "I'm sorry you're going through this, Charlotte." "Are you? Are you really sorry, or are you satisfied that I got what I deserved?" The question was fair, and I considered it carefully before answering. "I'm sorry you're in pain. I'm not sorry that you've learned there are consequences for treating people badly. I know I treated you badly. I know I was wrong about the money, the seating, all of it. I was so focused on impressing Marcus's family that I lost sight of what really mattered." What really mattered? You, our relationship, the fact that you're my mother and you love me even when I'm awful. The words sounded genuine, but Charlotte had always been articulate when she needed something. I'd learned to be cautious about her apologies, which were often strategic rather than heartfelt. "Charlotte, you didn't just treat me badly at the wedding planning. You've been treating me badly for years, acting ashamed of me, dismissing my life choices, only calling when you needed something. This wasn't one mistake, it was a pattern." "I know. I see that now. Marcus's mother actually said something today that made me realize how horrible I've been." "What did she say?" "She said that any woman who would humiliate her own mother probably wasn't mature enough for marriage. She said Marcus deserved someone with better values." The irony was painful. The very people Charlotte had been trying to impress had been appalled by her treatment of me. Her efforts to appear sophisticated had instead revealed her as someone with poor character and questionable morals. What happens now? With you and Marcus? I don't know. He's furious about the money situation, embarrassed about his parents' reaction, questioning whether he really knows who I am. We're supposed to leave for our honeymoon tomorrow, but... She gestured helplessly at her ruined dress, the disaster her wedding had become. "Charlotte, why are you here? What do you want from me?" "I want my mother back. I want to fix this. Fix us. I want to earn your forgiveness." "And how do you plan to do that?" "I don't know. I was hoping you could tell me." For the first time in our conversation, she was asking for guidance instead of demanding solutions. It was a small shift, but significant. "I can't tell you how to earn forgiveness, Charlotte. That's something you have to figure out yourself. But I can tell you that it starts with genuine understanding of what you did wrong, not just regret about the consequences. I understand that I hurt you, that I was selfish and ungrateful. Do you? Or do you understand that your strategy backfired and now you need damage control?" She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands folded in her lap. When she looked up, her eyes were red but clearer than I'd seen them in years. "Both, probably. I am sorry about the consequences, because they're terrible and embarrassing and I don't know how to fix them. But I'm also starting to understand that I became someone I don't like very much. Someone who would send her mother a bill for her own wedding and think that was acceptable behavior. When did that happen? When did you become someone who thought money was more important than relationships? I think it was gradual. Success felt so good after growing up with so little. Having money, having status, being admired, it became addictive. And somewhere along the way, I started measuring everyone by those same standards, including you. Including yourself. Yeah, including myself. I thought if I could just achieve enough, accumulate enough, impress the right people enough, then I'd finally feel secure. But today, when everything fell apart, I realized that all those things are just things. They don't mean anything if you don't have people who love you. You do have people who love you, Charlotte. You've always had that. You just stopped valuing it. I know that now. The question is whether it's too late to get it back. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her for the first time in months. Under the ruined makeup and expensive dress, I could see traces of the little girl I'd raised, the one who used to crawl into my bed after nightmares and tell me about her dreams for the future. She was still there, buried under layers of ambition and insecurity and misguided priorities. It's not too late, Charlotte, but it's also not going to be easy. Trust has to be rebuilt slowly, and it requires consistent actions, not just words. What kind of actions? That's for you to figure out. But I'll give you a hint. It starts with caring about other people's feelings as much as you care about your own success. She nodded slowly, absorbing this. Mom, can I ask you something? Of course. When Dad left, how did you keep going? How did you stay strong for me when everything was falling apart? The question surprised me with its insight. She was making a connection between her current crisis and the one that had shaped both our lives years earlier. I focused on what mattered most, taking care of you, building a life that had meaning, even if it wasn't perfect. I stopped trying to impress people who didn't care about us and started appreciating the people who did. I think I forgot that lesson somewhere along the way. It's never too late to remember. Charlotte stood up, the wedding dress swishing around her. She looked ridiculous and tragic and somehow beautiful all at the same time. I should go. Marcus is probably wondering where I am, and we have a lot to figure out. Charlotte, before you leave, I need you to understand something. I love you. I always have and always will. But I won't go back to being treated like a checkbook with maternal instincts. If we're going to rebuild our relationship, it has to be based on mutual respect. I understand. And Mom, thank you for not rescuing me today. I think I needed to fall apart before I could figure out how to put myself back together the right way. After she left, I sat in my living room, surrounded by the lingering scent of her perfume and the memory of her words. I didn't know if Charlotte's revelation was genuine or if desperation had temporarily made her more insightful than usual. Only time would tell whether she'd learned anything lasting from this experience or if she'd simply find new ways to manipulate situations to her advantage. But for the first time in years, I felt hopeful about having a real relationship with my daughter. Not the one-sided dynamic we'd fallen into, where I gave everything and she took whatever was offered. A genuine relationship between two adults who respected each other's worth and contributions. It wouldn't be easy to rebuild that trust. Charlotte would have to prove through consistent actions that she'd really changed, that she understood the value of the people who loved her. And I would have to learn to maintain boundaries while still being open to reconciliation. But tonight, for the first time in months, the future felt full of possibilities instead of disappointments. I'd chosen self-respect over enabling, dignity over keeping the peace, and somehow that choice had opened a door that I'd thought was permanently closed. The wedding dress would go to the cleaners, or maybe the donation pile. The expensive vendors would eventually be paid or write off their losses. The social embarrassment would fade as newer scandals captured people's attention. But the lessons learned today, both Charlotte's and mine, those would last forever. As I turned off the lights and headed to bed, I thought about all the dreams I'd deferred while focusing on Charlotte's needs. Maybe it was time to dust off some of those old ambitions, to remember who I'd been before I became defined entirely by my role as someone's mother. The woman who'd raised Charlotte alone wasn't going anywhere. But maybe she could also be the woman who traveled, who wrote, who pursued her own happiness with the same dedication she'd once devoted to her daughter's success. For the first time in decades, that seemed not just possible, but probable. And that possibility felt like the most valuable wedding gift I could have given myself. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.